Hello everyone. In this video, we will work the problem that we worked in the last video, but we'll work it in a different way. I've got the problem already set up. It's the same assumption, same conclusion, but we're going to adopt a different strategy. As you see, I have this one set up for negation elimination proof. So here's our target sentence. There's a ZHZ. And we're going to assume the negation of that statement. It's not the case that there's a ZHZ. And we're going to derive a formal contradiction inside of the subderivation. Once we get a sentence of the language and its denial, we can stop the subderivation, move to the next outer scope line, and drop the negation sign from our auxiliary assumption, and we'll be there. There's a number of ways of doing this, of course, even different ways of completing the subderivation in here. So multiple ways of doing this indirectly. I want to sort of challenge you to find a way to get to the sentence and its negation without using any other subderivations, so no sub-subderivations. You can lean pretty heavily on some of the plus rules. I'll give you a hint. You could definitely use quantifier negation. You can definitely, more than once, and you can definitely use rules like modus tollens and De Morgan's to help you get here. So why don't you go ahead and hit pause and give it a go. Get as far as you possibly can before you resume the video to get more hints. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and erase the Q and the not Q there. We won't actually get those particular terms. Let's start at the top. So sometimes we can just get pretty far by looking at rules we have to apply. And if you look at line 4, we have the negation of an existential. That's a great kind of sentence to use quantifier negation on. For all Z, tilde HZ. The reason it's great is because when you do quantifier negation on the negation of an existential, it gives you a universal. Universals are really easy to work with. So that's from 4 quantifier negation. And again, all we did was drag the negation sign across the quantifier, right? And then we changed the existential to universal. All right, so line 6, we might just say, well, let's instantiate that universal. Tilde HA. We drop the quantifier, replace the variable with any name we want, since there are no names in the proof. That's line 5, universal elimination. If we look up at lines 2 and 3, we have sitting up there a couple of more universal generalizations. And they have the one place predicate H in them, and they have that one place predicate H in the consequent of their conditionals, universally quantified conditionals. That's going to end up talking to line 6 in some interesting ways. So on line 7, we'll instantiate line 2, FA, horseshoe HA. Again, drop the quantifier in outer parens and replace the variable of quantification with A, which we're already working with. Line 8, we'll do universal elimination on line 3, and that'll give us GA, horseshoe HA. That's from line 3, universal elimination. And when you do that, what you're going to see is that you have an input for modus tollens. 6 and 7, we have a conditional and the negation of its consequent on lines 6 and 7. And then 6 and 8, we have a conditional and then the negation of its consequent is there on line 6. So that's input for modus tollens. It'll give us not FA from 6 and 7, modus tollens, and then it'll give us not GA from 6 and 8, modus tollens. Okay? So we are just applying some of the rules that we see an opportunity to apply. Now might be a good time to hit pause because we're going to have to start getting creative here about how we're going to get to our formal contradiction lower down in this subderivation. And so this would be a good time for you to hit pause and see if you can put something together that's going to give you a formal contradiction. When you think you've got it, go ahead and hit resume. Okay, so at this point, one thing we can do is see that this individual A is not F, this individual A is not G, right? And what we have to notice is that these denials with these two one-place predicates, F and G, are, they're sort of comparing, we can compare that to what we have up here on line 1, which is the existential. Again, those one-place predicates F and G are there. So it's a little bit of a stretch, but maybe you see a way of connecting them up. Not necessarily in a good way, by the way. So let's take on line 11, let's take those two sentences and we're going to put them in order. Tilde FA, tilde GA, and we're going to conjoin them, conjunction introduction. That's 9 and 10 conjunction introduction. Now I put them in this order, F and G, because that's the order they appear in up there on line 1. What I'm going to do next is hopefully something you could anticipate, at least a little bit, maybe dimly. This is input for De Morgan's. So we have the conjunction of negations. That gives us the negation of what? A disjunction. So in some sense, we're factoring out that tilde from those two terms, and we're changing the ampersand to a wedge. So that's 11 De Morgan's. And now what we see should be shaping up as kind of the opposite of what we have up there on line 1. How are we really gonna put it together, though? It may be a little unexpected, but we do have to do universal, right? Universal introduction. So I'm taking those A's out and I'm putting a Y in for them. That's line 12, universal introduction. And I'm choosing the Y variable very deliberately because that's the variable up there on line 1. And you might think, why did you go for the universal? Well, I'm thinking ahead. I have the universal followed by a tilde, and that's going to give me input for quantifier negation. I could have actually put an existential quantifier here on line 13 by existential introduction, but it's just not going to give me what I want. What I want is the sentence and its opposite, and the universal is going to do that for me, even though up there on line 1, it's the existential. By the way, I can do universal introduction on this name A, because the name A doesn't appear in any assumptions, and because the name A won't appear in the result of universal introduction. So it's not on line 13. Sets me up on line 14 to do quantifier negation again. This time, I'm dragging the negation sign across the universal quantifier, and I'm changing the quantifier from universal to existential, and the result is, that's 13Q in, and the result is the negation of this existentially quantified disjunction. And then line 15 is simply going to be a reiteration of line 1. Fy, wedge, gy, from line 1, reiteration. And then on line 12, on line 15, I have my Q, and on line 14, I have my negation of Q. That's what I needed to stop the subderivation, and that's what I have on these two lines. Okay? Subderivation then stops, and my target sentence gets to come out on line 16 from 4 through 15, negation elimination. It's a little bit longer proof than the one we did in the last video, but there is less by way of subderivations going on. So there's the trade-off. So there you have it, just a second way of doing that same derivation problem. It's often good to see more than one way of working a problem. By the way, there's more than two ways of working this problem, but I think we'll leave it alone for there.